Well, hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Clarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. You guys, I gotta say, I think I found something here, and it's going to be something that you're really going to want to listen to. And so it really starts with a question. And it's like a question, and you're going to be like, come on, is this really true? And we're going to unpack something really cool. So if you would like to rewind the clock on your body, then you are going to want to hang out and listen to this episode because we are going to bring some cool stuff here. I'm honored to be hanging out with Olly Wood. How are you today, sir?
Really good. Thank you, Dave.
Awesome. You are the founder of Body Reset. So why don't you tell the world what is going on at Body Reset these days?
Yeah, it's been a good decade diving into what we do now. It's certainly been an iterative process, and yeah, really enjoying what we're doing. I think for me, it was a very natural progression. I started off as an in-person personal trainer, so it was very much focused on how to optimize movement, every part of progression, muscle contraction, strength, right? And anyone that runs a business, anyone that has a lot on their plate realizes that there's a level of stress and information that you're generally fighting against when you're trying to get these workouts in. So for me, it became a pretty big learning experience from the client throughout that process of, okay, I've nailed exercise. I know exactly what this looks like for a movement standpoint, but if that's all I'm looking at, I'm missing 95% of the picture. So Body Reset became a natural progression online of really, there's 10 years of study in every single one of those directions: lifestyle design, the mindset element, the gut health aspect, to the managing that nervous system, that state that I think many of us find ourselves in that heightened space throughout the day. So yeah, Body Reset and what it's come now is just a collection of experts that allow us to really focus on the full thing, right? Really getting your body back on your side. Like you said, rewinding the clock on your body. And we can dive into all those things today, but really that awareness of, if you feel like your body's not working on your side, you feel like you're putting the effort in nutritionally, exercise-wise, whatever, and you're not getting the same results, that's certainly where we start to come in.
Wow, that's cool. And you actually then converted from personal training into the business world. I mean, personal trainer obviously is a business in and of itself. But what hooked me on this whole thing, Olly, was I saw more energy, more confidence, and more momentum. So who on this call, let me put it this way: if you don't need more energy, if you don't need more confidence, if you don't need more momentum, that I would just kind of disconnect right now, because that's what we're going to talk about. And I think, again, running a business takes a ton of energy, and it comes from somewhere, and you're usually robbing somebody to to give it. So that's what I love about the confidence, the momentum. Again, there's just a ton of great stuff here, so thank you. All the way from New Zealand, so that's where the accent is from. So I'm sure I don't have an accent to you. I sound normal. You're the one with the accent, so
Yeah,
I
not
just
at all.
kind of put that out there. So, and it's already tomorrow there. So don't tell me how my day ends, because I'm excited to end my day here. But I wanted to understand kind of your entrepreneurial journey, because we do love to talk about the transition. We have a lot of people that are listening around the world that are in their 9 to 5. They're in their job, and they look at guys like you or guys like me, and they just have this envy of, wow, I wish I could jump in and follow my passion, or jump in and become an entrepreneur like that, own a business. Did that come to you early, or kind of explain that journey to us if you could, Olly, as far as how that worked for you?
Yeah, I feel like I was a relatively typical entrepreneur in the sense that I was putting my finger in every pie, right? I was getting involved in every single opportunity I could. I was involved in some startups and really getting awareness of that startup world. That was really interesting, starting to understand the funding background and the whole pitching decks and all of these things around that sort of world of just like, nobody's got any money, but everyone's got the work ethic to get something off the ground. That space was really exciting for me. Of course, running the personal training after about the first year was entirely self-employed. So this frustration of delivering clients versus bringing in new clients, building up a level of your own skill set, but realizing that doesn't matter if nobody doesn't know about you, right? So they're starting to get this understanding of a sales process, and then of course a lead process, and not just relying on your own gym. And I think for a personal trainer, and certainly people in a self-employed role, typically it's built off the back of another company, right? And you're usually reliant off leads off one particular company. So for me, that became, about a 5 or 6 year journey of just trying to absorb everything possible in the space, because I realized I was a grasshopper in the space, right? I really didn't know what was going on. And I knew I was really good at my craft, at the thing I wanted to do. But I realized that at the end of the day, that didn't matter until people knew about the product and that we could actually get people to change. And that behavioral aspect is something that I think I've really moved towards. My entire 10-year obsession around health, I think, can be summarized by moving from obsession around training, obsession around gut health, and then really the shift, this understanding of human behavior, right? And that's really where those two worlds meet, between that entrepreneurial growth and just being a personal trainer in a gym, where you start to really understand that space of moving towards getting clients or getting prospects to make the shifts that they already want internally. So it's understanding of those desires and being able to, I think the big one for most entrepreneurs, and I still struggle with it now, I'm sure you do as well, is you, at the start of the process, it's stressful, but it's exciting. There's all these things going on. There's all of the opportunities in front of you, right? And then you finally catch one that, okay, this could be really something. And then you have to change your entire identity, because you have to go from that person that's the opportunity seeker to, I now need to remove the other distractions to really go all in on this. Because we know, I'm sure you know just as many people as I do, that call themselves an entrepreneur, but they have 10 things going all at the same time. If they just got rid of 9 of them, one would get off the ground. And I think that's really a massive, I'm a huge fan of entrepreneurship purely through the lens of your own personal development, because it requires so much of you to, one, protect that energy to keep going, but two, protect that focus so that you can keep going.
Yeah, wow, that's great. And I think that's where the confidence comes in, because to your point there, Olly, if you have 10 things going, you have 10 things going either because you're afraid to pare it down to one, you don't have the confidence that you can do that, or you just are so scattered and you don't know any better. So do you run into people that have that lack that confidence? I'm assuming that's why that's one of your key tenets of faith, so to speak, where you're trying to build up their confidence. Do they come to you with, oh my gosh, I need all 10 of these to stay alive? Or how does the confidence piece come into this?
Yeah, it's just the concern that if we were to focus on one, that fails and I've got nothing left to work with. But for me, I don't think I was special in that space. I think I was in the same category as everybody else. I actually, for me, that first lockdown back in 2020, I was still in that space where the company, the online component, was growing really, really well, but I've still done 5 other things, right? So my suggestion to anyone now would just be a case of give it a month, just one focus for a month. You put nothing else on your plate and you go. And for me, most people through certainly the New Zealand lockdown just caught up on their favorite TV show. I built a business, right? And for me, that was a case of going from 10 things to, okay, this is one thing that's going to go to the moon. And being able to separate those two is, again, something that I was lucky in, just in regards to timing. That burning the boats moment was something that I knew I needed to do, but I hadn't got around to doing it. If it's an external trigger, if you can come to that level of strength internally, it's an amazing spot. It's always the hardest part of the entire journey, right? How many people do we know that want to get into that space that just don't quite want to lose that job because it's a little bit more comfortable? That's a really, really tough first step. So for me, totally lucky in that space, but I think it was the only way that I was going to build what we've got now.
Sure. So, and how do you get people? I mean, I know even for myself at times, like my body is, or my psychological piece of me, I'm like the dispensable piece, right? I'm, customer comes first, or family comes first, or whatever comes first. And it feels like your body never comes first. And that's kind of like, I'm assuming I'm not the best mind space to be in. How do you help people that come to you, or that you come across, that have that mentality where my body's dispensable or it's indispensable, whatever they think? They don't really put the proper amount of balance in there, where body's always last. How do you help them understand the importance of that?
Yeah. For us, that's for me, it's a massive fascination. We specialize working with business owners, right? So this is our conversation every single day.
Yep.
And being able to, I think the big flip is exactly what you've said, which is we're always coming last, but what's the one thing required in order to move forward? Like, I think most business owners are incredibly aware that they're the bottleneck in their company, right? They're the ones that it always seems to get stuck on unless they've got that recruitment aspect and they're building, they're growing. But really, it comes back to their own space to be able to focus, to keep that energy to grow to a next step. So for us, I think it's really reframing it, is saying, look, all of these beautiful things that you want to do in your life, if you're not here, that all gets put in a bucket and given to somebody else, right? And I think a phrase that always hits people pretty hard is, if you don't make time for your wellness, you get forced to make time for your illness, right? And I think that's really a space where certainly we see this as a fighting point for a lot of personal trainers, as they see business as the enemy of health. Whereas I think the big thing that we try transition to and really resonate with a lot of clients around is, okay, I can see what you want to do. You've got these amazing projects in front of you. If you're going to actually achieve these things, you need your body along for the ride, right? Because if you're tired and unfocused in that meeting and you can't hear those words and you have to go back and do those notes, if you're taking twice as long to write that summary that you needed to get through just because you don't have that mental capacity anymore, it really comes back to the sharpening the axe before you start swinging, right? The lazy thing to do when you've built that muscle of work is to just keep working 10, 12 hours a day, right? Because you end up becoming complacent, you end up being slower, you're unfocused, all of these things. If you can move, and it is very much building the muscle of being able to get back into some version of movement, it could simply be as easy as a 5 deep breaths on the end of the bed just to check in with you before the day starts, right? So many business owners have got so good at all of the problems externally, firefighting those without ever just taking a second to say, am I okay today? Do I need anything? Right? It's the coffee to keep going. It's the quick snack in between meetings. And very much we are coming last. But I think that expectation or that awareness of, if I'm not making time for me now, it's only going to knock me on the door later, right? Or knock on the door later. So that awareness of, it has to come within. I'm never going to be the coach that's sitting there telling you the facts and you need to do this and that, because I don't think that's worked for the society overall. It has to be an internal desire where most people, certainly around 40, 45, they reach a certain threshold where they're like, hang on, if I want to keep doing this for the next 10, 15, 20 years, I need to be in the place where my body's along for the ride. And that's really where we come in to make this easier and break that down into a process that's manageable, rather than saying you need to do this. And I think it's really that. It's just a big transition of realizing we've got both these along for the ride, and your biggest business asset is yourself. If you don't have that energy and you're not able to show up because you're in a hospital bed, that's kind of where we need to start.
Yeah. Well, that's really wise. The biggest asset that you have is yourself. Your company's biggest asset is yourself. And we tend to like make it the last. Like I said, I sleep less, eat worse, exercise less, whatever that is. But I mean, I think it feels, I'll use the word feels, it feels selfish, Olly, right? To put myself first, because an average person listening right now, business owner, entrepreneur, says, okay, we think in black and white. I'm a huge black and white thinker, and I'm trying to find gray in my life. But I'm like, I think in my mind, right? I'm like, okay, what I'm hearing this guy tell me in this cool accent is that I either am going to do this or I'm going to do that. I'm either going to pay rent or go to the gym. I'm either going to get more sleep or I'm going to serve my customer less, right? There's this kind of either or thing. So are these a lot of blind spots that you help people try to work through psychologically? Because I saw you talk physical, you talk digestive, and then you talk psychologically as well. So address that psychological piece if you can, Olly, because I feel that's where, people get stuck and we can't even get to the first day of the gym because we can't get past all the things that we feel like we have to give up. How do you balance all that out?
Yeah. That is exactly where I was going to go. The reason that psychological is the base of any business owner, any entrepreneur getting things back on track, is that if you stay in that space, if I need to pay the bills, I need this to be moving forward, I need that next rung. Imagine what that nervous system is doing every single day, right? You're in that fight or flight reactivity mode. Everything's urgent. If it's not urgent, those days you don't get anything done, right? And I think it's a space where we get so good, or a lot of business owners get very good at getting up and going when things are really urgent. They need to be finished, or for somebody else. that bill needs to be paid, right?
Right.
But what happens when that urgency isn't there, right? And you've still got that same ingrained mindset of it needs to be urgent, it needs to be now. And health is very much one of those things in the category. I always bring it back to those quadrants, right? Of what's urgent and important, what's not
Yep.
important and urgent, what's important but not urgent, etc. And health is very much one of those things that we know is important, but it's not urgent right now until it does become that way, and we wish you did it 5 years ago. So for me to really resonate with a lot of business owners, the conversation really is something that's already apparent in their lives, which is they're focusing on what's always urgent, which means they're not getting the important stuff done. And the thing that comes into that category is very much health. And I think it's a discussion that if you're in the first year or two of business and it's very much reactivity, it's getting things off the ground, you're paying the rent, you're really hustling, that is a portion in your life where I understand health is not going to be number one. Our discussion is usually coming in when you're 3, 5, 10 years into business and you're stuck in the mentality of always needing things to be urgent to be able to get up and go. And this becomes a second or third tier of business where you've got a team in place, you're trying to consolidate processes in a way that you're not always the bottleneck. And I think a big part of that mindset is requiring, sometimes you're not required for certain tasks, or that you are able to leave in the middle of the day, but you still find a way to keep working, right? So a lot of it is not actually the business isn't struggling anymore. The business is actually doing great, but you're not actually giving yourself permission to relax, enjoy, or look after yourself. I have this conversation every single week, and I think that the discussion really comes back down to the person that can afford the beach house is the one that can't enjoy it, right? And it's really that space where we get so good at building the muscle of work that once we really build something great, we've got no muscle left of joy, right? We've got no space to really sit back, relax, enjoy the space, or simply allocate time for ourselves in that day. And I think that's very much something that feels weird. It feels uncomfortable, but just like work, it's a muscle to be built. And I think over time, when you talk to a business owner in that lens, it's something that you can start to build that threshold up, because the reason you feel comfortable in business is because you're always doing it. The reason you don't feel comfortable in the gym is you haven't touched it for 10 years.
Well, and that's a great tool, Ollie, that you're talking about. And in the US, we call it the Eisenhower matrix, because Dwight Eisenhower, a US president, created that when he was talking about urgency and important,
Yeah.
what's urgent, what's important. And I think, to your point, if everything is always urgent, it's kind of like the boy that cried wolf, right? Eventually that muscle is gone. Eventually that urgency just kind of calluses over, because everything falls into the urgent, I got to do it right now type type So thanks for sharing that. So for people listening, Google Eisenhower matrix and see that, sit with it. It's a great tool to be able to use the way that, Ollie's talking about. The other thing that he just said that I wrote down, and I'm like, man, that's really wisdom, is to give yourself permission, and I think about myself, and we just had one of my grandboys had some baseball at a cool place, but it was kind of towards the end of the day. I think the game started at 3 or 3:30. And it was like, there's something in the back of my mind that's like, you should be working. What are you doing here? And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm like in my 50s. I own my own business. It's like, where is this coming from? It sure wasn't my family, my clients. It was all coming from internal. And so, when we come back from the break here, I want to kind of unpack that real quick. Awesome. Well, welcome back. And again, I'm just making myself vulnerable. I struggle with those 3 words: give yourself permission. So if I came to you as a client and I was saying, hey, Ollie, I'm really struggling with this. I really, there's something in my mind that's just I'm not giving myself permission. I don't know how to do that. I've never been successful with that before. Is there any tips that you would have for me or other people listening that might be stumbling with those same words?
Yeah. The first part is really that discussion around the bucket. I think that's one that's really helpful, right? It's that conversation of, you're not here, you're not filling your own bucket, then you're not here to help later on, right? It's the classic, are you putting your oxygen mask on before you can help others? I think that's a space that's always worth having. Yep. Provided we've had that conversation, there's 2 questions I would ask, which is, the first one is, if your friend was in the same spot, what would you say to them? Right? What would you say to them if they were in the same spot? They were missing out on their exercise, they were missing out on their kids, all of those things. And the reason I I give it that frame, and I think it's an important frame to look through, is it allows you to look at it through more self-compassion. And I think that's a space for health, especially, that is a shift that's required if health is going to be a long-term journey. For most people, unless they're being healthy all their lives, they usually start on a new journey because they reach a certain threshold of pain where something needs to change, right? Which is usually, said a different way, a level of beating themselves up that they no longer want to tolerate. That level could be 5 kilos overweight. That could be on the hospital bed with my first heart attack. That
Sure.
personal threshold is different for individuals. But wherever that comes in, it's usually motivated by pain. I'm going to say 99.9% of the time, it is motivated by pain.
Okay.
So very much like the business owner who starts off with, the opportunity focus to get started and needs to reframe to continue to do the boring work, continue to do the steps that work over time. In their health environment, they need to go through that same transition. They've motivated themselves through pain, through beating themselves to finally get them to start. Now they need to get to a point of self-compassion so they can actually enjoy this long term. Hey, I know you didn't get that 5th or 6th workout in today, but you got 3 in, and that was much better than last month. Well done. Keep moving forward, right? So it becomes a space of compassion around how you talk to yourself. And I think that awareness of the most resilient people are the ones that are self-compassionate is really something I hold truly, because if you're beating yourself up, the world's hard enough as is. It doesn't need to happen internally as well, right? So
Yeah.
that space of being your own supporter, that's why that frame I think is so powerful. Is what would you say to a friend? And how is that different to how you're talking to yourself right now? That usually gets a oh shit moment, right?
That's
The
cool.
second part to that is another lens. Zoom out. What does this look like at 80 for Dave? Because at the end of the day, for us, I truly believe there's no wealth without health. So what are you working for anyway? If you're building this business, you're doing all these great things, but you're in a wheelchair by 60 and you've had your leg amputated because you've got, you haven't looked after your diabetes at that point, which happens so much more regularly than people think. I think that's just a lens of people stepping out, looking at what they're actually building for, because it's really easy, again, to get stuck in that urgency matrix of it just needing to be done now. Just, next month I can relax. Next year I can relax. There's that next milestone to get through. So I think both those lenses are really where I get clients to look through and really shift that belief. And that's very much that reframing of how your central nervous system operates in today's world, that then we can finally look at that digestive and movement piece.
Sure. So, and thank you for sharing that. And so if we would jump on that piece and then we start, investigating, doing research, start going into what you just said, how long does it take? I mean, you talk about rewinding the clock. I mean, people would just be happy to slow the dang clock down, Olly, right? So you're talking about rewind this clock. How long does that take? I mean, again, my black and white thinking, I'm like, oh, sure, I got to work out 20 hours a day and I can never eat a piece of chocolate again in my life. I mean, this is what my brain does to me. And so I have to really watch to make sure, because I'm going to discard this real quick if I allow those thoughts to be there. And so, what does that timing look like? I mean, if you start going down this road, are you noticing digestive things right away or physical things right away? Or what does that look like for your average person?
Such a beautiful question. So many ways we could go. The first one I want to just address there is give yourself permission to feel good at 80%, right? Because right away, that black or white thinking is a space where a lot of guys get stuck. And for a lot of men, especially in that business world, very much women as well, is the all or nothing mentality has usually allowed you to pursue certain things in business. When it comes to your own personal happiness, success in wealth building and happiness are two different things. So giving yourself permission to feel good at 80%, right? And I think that's something that you need to address first before we go down that rabbit hole, because if you set a goal of losing 10 kilos in 2 months and then you lose 8 kilos and you're like, this was a waste of time, right? That's a space where if you step back and you're actually looking much better, you're feeling much better. And maybe you put 4 kilos of muscle on that period too. So actually it's a win-win overall. And I think just looking at it through a myopic lens of this was a failure doesn't give yourself permission to actually enjoy the process. And it really comes back to this whole concept of, are you pursuing a certain goal for the goal itself, or are you pursuing the goal for what it makes for you in the process? Because if you're someone who shows up daily for you, does that morning journal to reflect on how you're a little bit more reactive to your wife or to your leaders inside your work, or maybe there was a I get out for a morning walk and I consolidate my thoughts and I feel like I'm really able to present that in my next team meeting.
Mhm.
How many of those different areas have you now just shown up at a better person and felt proud in your own skin? That becomes a very different leader. So I think all of those things, again, we can go in 10 different ways here, but I think that's a really, really important part of that behavioral design of really making a shift long term. But to
Wow.
come back to your question, provided you've done that work,
Yeah.
is certainly on the female side, and where we look at a lot more hormonally, there's two ratios I can give you to at least give you a gauge.
Yeah.
Is for every year that things have been really out of whack, we can look at rebuilding that in months, right? So if it's been out of whack for 6 years, we can look at 6 months to rebuild that. That gives you plenty of time to look at it. You want me to say 30 days, maybe 14 days, but that gives you a good amount of time to allow your body to get back on track. And the reason we look at that through that lens is, what does every business owner do when they want to get back in shape? They slog themselves in the gym 3 times a week and push the body and simply add more stress, right? So the conversation we're really having here is, one, give yourself permission to rebuild that body and do it in a compassionate way. And 2, that allows space for you to rather than go down the military route that worked when you were 20, get the body healthy first, right? Which is rebuilding that gut health, looking at digestion. There's absolutely that part of the component of rebuilding that gut bacteria to a point where you're actually digesting food again, you're extracting energy from your food rather than having that 2 p.m. slump. All of those beautiful things are required, but you only see them when you give yourself permission to step back and realize it's part of how you feel every day rather than a 60-day goal.
Wow. Well, hey, I have to say, I'm a high D on the disc, so I want results like right away, Ollie. So when you said 30 days, I'm like, no, I want 20 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to feel better in 20 minutes. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I think the world, especially, I don't know how it is in New Zealand, but here in the US, if you don't get your drive-through stuff in 90 seconds, man, there's, words are usually exchanged somewhere, shape, or form, whether it's in the car or it's to the person in the drive-through. I mean, we've made this so darn fast and everything's going at such a speed. So I like the fact that you have to be in it for the long haul, but I got to believe that you probably lose people because of that thought process. Like you just said, a month for every year, and there might be people listening that have never really addressed their health and they're in their 50s. So, they might be talking 4 years between now and the time they get to where they want to be or whatever. That's a long time. So, I'm assuming this is a lifestyle shift that you're trying to get people to where
Totally.
it's not like you do something, you achieve something, and then you go right back to the way that you were. I'm assuming, correct?
Totally. And that's part of the business of lifestyle design, right? Or program design more specifically, is how can I make sure that I can get your result in your first 2 weeks so you really see that this works so that you're in it for the long run, right? So for most of our guys, they see their improvement in energy in a couple of days. Like that's something that's instant. But that awareness of that's great. You've changed a couple of things, but are you really here to make a change? Or do you want to just, how many people have lost 5 kilos in a month and then put 10 back on? The people that come to us realize that model is broken and that they really want to build something long-term, because the diet that restricts calories and makes you train twice as hard to lose 10 kilos in a couple months is not built on a foundation that's going to last long-term. And a lot of times it's actually, we need to rebuild the base before we can move forward, right? If you're getting in a car and there's a tire flat and you just push the accelerator harder, you might get a couple Ks down the road. But if you truly want to get to the next state, you need to fix the tire first, right? So it's a different type of person. And we absolutely lose people in that discussion. But really for us, we see that as a self-qualification process. We're not for everyone. We're for the person that wants to create a long-term change.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, and you brought up a word that I kind of want to unpack as we start to land here. You talked about stress, and stress is everywhere, and I feel that there's healthy stress and then there's unhealthy stress. I mean, your boss, let's say, or a leader in your company tells you or asks you whatever to have a project done by Friday at 5. That's a healthy stress. I mean, that gives you something to shoot for. It gives you some accountability. Having that same project done in 20 minutes obviously is not the positive stress that we're looking for. But how do you look at stress? How do you address that for somebody listening that, again, the research shows the vast majority of people in the US, probably in the world, have stress in their day-to-day job? how do you use it to our advantage? How do you what are some things that you can share on your research about stress?
Yeah. Great question. I think the big one, it ties into everything we've talked about so far, but it's really the conversation of stress is not a level, it's a threshold, right? Which means that there's so many components that come into how you look after yourself, how you show up is a significant part of how you operate under stress. There's a huge difference between Dave 20 years ago and the stress he had in that role 20 years ago compared to what that looks like now. If you put 20-year-old Dave in your role now, he'd probably flop, being like, this is way too much all in one day. But you build it up over time, right? It's an awareness of, you really build up that personal threshold that things become busy, things are important, things could topple, but there's a level of tolerance that you've built up over time. It's a muscle, right? So it's really that balance between the two, because if Dave now feels like he's getting overwhelmed, he's feeling stressed, that for us becomes a beautiful trigger to step back and look at, well, how can we rebuild that a little bit? Where's the stress come through digestively? Are we sleeping at all? Have we got some version of routine? Or are we allowing that stress to get on top of us where we know we're in that sort of reactive state? We're procrastinating. We're trying to do 10 things at once and not moving forward, rather than the ability to step back, consolidate, and move forward with one. So it's really that understanding of stress is a threshold, not just a set level. It's understanding the thoughts that go through your head around stress itself, right? There's one person that jumps out of a plane in a for fun and enjoys it and calls it a sport. The next person says, that was something I never want to do again, or never want to touch because it would freak me out. So really it comes down to personality traits as well. And it comes to the level of stress that you want to tolerate. So absolutely, stress and toxicity are two things that we look at a lot. It's things that we're never going to get rid of in our life, but it is something that we can tolerate better. And therefore, it just comes back to a strength and resilience of the individual. And whether it's a case of actually looking after that, rebuilding and listening to that rather than blocking it out, that's a huge part, right? Most people are having a coffee or 10 to wake up, and then a wine or 10 to calm down. And they're not taking that time to tune in. So that's definitely the first part of it. Second part is, how do we build that muscle? And something as simple as, the cold showers has become really, really popular. It's not my favorite, but it's an example. It could be something like the high intensity interval training and short bouts. It could simply be the weight training, where you're getting to a point where actually you're building that muscle of creating a small pocket of stress in your day, which allows you to tolerate other stresses, right? If I did a workout this morning and I challenge myself, I choose the stress in my day, what does that shift throughout the stresses I tackle throughout the day? I'm more resilient to them, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can tackle it. How you associate stress and how you sharpen the axe to get ready for stress, I think, is a big part of that process.
Wow, that's so cool. It feels like there's a lot of components to this. And does that tend to, number one, is that true? And number two, how do you help people, like we talked about before, that are going so fast? Do they have to sacrifice other things, or how do you integrate that into your day? I'm just curious if if you've seen successfully that integrate with, or is it a huge shift? Because we talk a lot about small course corrections versus these huge fundamental shifts. Would you consider the body reset to be more of a fundamental huge shift, or more small course corrections along the way?
Small course corrections along the way to lead to a fundamental shift, because health is not a small endeavor. This is a life pursuit, and it should be, because it's the only vehicle you have. And I think the people that struggle with health are the ones that are continuing to try find the 30-day quick fix, which mean they really break down in the long term. Whereas if the goal is long term to start with, there's no rush, there's a lot of experimentation and permission to fail. And I think really being such a multifaceted space needs to be approached that way. Whereas if you're just trying to fix your health through slogging yourself in the gym, we're missing 95% of the puzzle, and it needs to require you to look at other things. It's a self-experimentation process. So that awareness of, most questions that people are going to ask me around, what should I eat for breakfast? What does nutrition look like? What does your exercise routine look like? The answer is always, it depends, because there's so much required in context to find out what those next steps are. And that's not a sexy answer at all, Dave, as you can imagine, but it's that awareness of where are you right now and what's the next step your body needs to move forward. And if you're willing to give yourself permission to fail, to feel a little bit silly, to actually look towards tuning in and getting your body, your emotions, your awareness of how you produce energy throughout the day to a point that it allows you to actually show up as a better human. It builds your internal drive, confidence, and ability to show up for you, for others, for your business, all the things you want to do. It's usually going to extend the lifespan of all of those things so much more. And that's exactly what hard feels like. That's why 90% of people won't do it.
Wow. And I'm guessing that when the people that don't do it, I mean, if you're listening and you don't want to do it, that's totally fine. Just don't get mad at Olly, right? Because I mean,
or do, right? At the end of the day, it's going to get to a point where how much worse does it need to get before you make a change? Because at some point, every single person has this realization. Some people have it 25, some people have it 65. Obviously, the later you have it, the harder it is to rewind. But that space of I want to be healthy, but I just can't be motivated enough. The answer to that is going to be, well, how much worse would you like it to get? Because eventually that's going to need to shift. And if it doesn't, you're going to get to some version of regret. So you really choose your pain. It's just getting to a point of which one would you like to choose.
Wow. So for somebody listening that's intrigued by this, that is curious, I mean, like a couple of logistical things. Is it like a one-on-one coaching? Is it group coaching? Is it pre-taped or, pre-taped stuff? I saw some of that on your website. Just walk us through kind of like what are a couple of our first steps that we would want to, if somebody's interested, what are the first couple steps to do here?
Yeah. So we put a ton of content out for free. If you Google Body Reset on our podcast, on YouTube, or on our website. Really, if you're a reader, you're a listener, or you're a watcher, we've got all of that content covered. We really make sure we go into a lot of the stuff. And as you've just rightly said, this is such a massive topic. The only way that this is effective is breaking it down into iterative steps. So if you want to dive into even one or two of our podcasts and see that space of, hey, that's something I could actually add to my morning. It's not actually harder than what I'm doing right now. And wow, my energy is so much better. So
Sure.
It becomes this process, as you said, of those quick win, those little adjustments. I'm like, that actually really works. And I can start to look at what the next step is or what the next pillar I'll start to tackle is. So I think that space is really, certainly you can look at, and I think we help thousands of people every single month that just look at our free content. So I think that's definitely a space that allows you to look at health in a different way. We're not pushing a certain type of diet. We're not pushing a certain type of plan. It's really that awareness of here's some strategies to make sure your body operates better. Choose to use them if you like. From an actual programming standpoint, we very much look at this from an individual level. We want to make sure that we're looking deeper into your blood work. We're looking better into your lifestyle so that we can actually get an idea of this working in your life. Being able to get the perfect nutrition plan is not perfect unless it's something you can actually do on a day-to-day basis, something that works for you. So simplicity is key. Enjoyment is key. Looking at those spaces that can really be sustainable for you long-term usually becomes through more of a one-on-one conversation. We do layer a hybrid aspect of this where we bring in the group coaching. I think it's important to look at this through, the person to the left and the right of you is going through the same process. And hey, they actually tweaked this and it worked really, really well for them. And I think from an identity shift, really making sure this is something that happens long-term, that's a really, really powerful space to lean into. So we do a mix of both and really making sure that we're building something that doesn't just work for 30 days. It's not a diet. This is what you want to do long-term and you feel great doing it.
Wow, that's so cool. And it feels hopeful. It feels like there's hope, listening to you, and for people that maybe are starting to lose hope, lose faith, thinking this is just the way that it has to be. All of a sudden there's a spark that says, wow, maybe I could rewind this clock. That would be just so cool if just one person, listening was able to, change and turn around their life, extend their life, whatever the words are. That's so cool. One last question, I'm going to let you go, Olly. What would be your tip of the day for people listening? And maybe it's something we covered, maybe it's just something on your heart right now, but what's one tip that you could help us all with, again, whether we covered it or not? What's a great place to end for you?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of parts here that I think feel rather big, and breaking them down into simple steps is absolutely where we start, right? The goal is building the baseline till the first one feels like it's just a part of your day and then finding the next one. I really, really want to emphasize that. Sure. But I think the first roadblock that needs to be overcome is, do you think there's someone more busy out there getting this done? And the answer is yes. I just had a post that went up in our private group yesterday of a lady who week one of her joining the program found out she had cancer. right? And she went through this whole process of having to go through treatments, building everything back. And she's just put up a post being like, I've lost the weight. I feel amazing. I've tackled cancer and I'm back on track.
Oh,
And
wow.
those kind of posts are like, wow, my
Yeah.
problems just got put in perspective, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly,
you can
right.
go to, you can go to a website and go through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of testimonials to be like, that person's like me. I can do this, right?
Wow.
So I think that's really a perspective shift that allows you to look at this in a different light, allows you to give yourself permission to try it and just look at realizing that it might not happen overnight. It might not feel that comfortable, but you really know it's worth it. If you zoom out with that 80-year-old lens and you know that every adjustment you make now just extends that a little bit. And I'm not saying that just as a rough estimate. We track that and we have seen in a very real way adding 5 years, 10 years to people's lives because we look at the blood work, we look at the biomarkers changing. It can be done. So all you have to do is start.
That is so cool. Well, thank you so much. So for somebody listening, Olly, that's intrigued by this, that wants to learn more, that wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, I think the best way would be going through any of our free content first. I want to make sure that you love that, you know about it, you understand what angle we're coming from first. I think the best recommendation would be I direct you towards our main website, the bodyreset.online, and go through the challenge. There's a male and female version of this. It's a 5-day sequence. So very much, as Dave's really emphasized today, is find those simple, sustainable steps that you can install into your own life. They're super easy to do. They build your energy up, they build your health up, and you know you can tackle more. If you go through that challenge, then you want to go through more, then you can simply book a call with our team, go through what that might look like, dive a bit deeper into what a plan might look like, and we can go from there.
So I go to bodyreset.online, and then there's a 5-day kind of starter spot for
Yeah, it's a
me.
5-day series, 5-day challenge that you can walk through, emailed out to you every day with a video, a couple resources that you can really install. And I think it's a very easy way, free process for you to go through to make a change.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to do that. So I'm going to do that. I'll report back to you, Olly, on how that worked for me. I'll report back to our listeners. Thank you so much for this, man. This is cool. I love the hope. I love the fact that we're able to prioritize our health and our body ahead of other things. And I'm going to be working on giving myself permission. I'm thinking right away, giving myself permission to have a hot fudge sundae, but that's probably not a good place to start. So I'll work on giving myself permission to enjoy my life and enjoy my exactly where I'm at. And so thank you so much for all you're doing, Olly, and I can't wait to keep learning from you.
Thank you, Dave. The questions were great. They were really insightful. They were different, and I really enjoyed today.
Awesome.